The night had teeth. That was the only way I could describe it. The way the cold air outside the Harrington Grand Hotel bit through my jacket as I stood on the steps breathing in slow and measured. The way my therapist once taught me to do when the world felt too loud. The kind of breathing that says, I am fine, even when everything inside you is screaming that you are anything but. I was not fine. I straightened my tie, checked the time on my watch, 7:47 p.m., and told myself that the next 3 hours were just math. Smile at the right people. Say the right things. Drink exactly 1 glass of wine to appear sociable and not a drop more. Collect the quarterly award they were going to hand me in front of 200 colleagues and smile like it meant everything, even though lately, nothing felt like it meant much of anything. My name is Jim Green. I am 34 years old. I am the head of strategic development at Vossen Meridian, the kind of man that people in meetings describe as dependable and sharp and always knows what to say. I have built my entire professional identity on the premise that I do not crack under pressure. I do not flinch. I do not show up to a company dinner looking like I haven't slept properly in 6 weeks. I walked through the revolving glass doors and into the warmth of the lobby. The ballroom was already filling when I stepped inside. Round tables dressed in white linen, centerpieces of ivory flowers and softly glowing candles, the gentle hum of a string quartet playing something classical and forgettable near the far wall. Servers moved like ghosts between clusters of people in expensive suits, carrying trays of champagne flutes that caught the chandelier light and threw it back in little fractured pieces. I took a glass I didn't intend to drink and found my name card near the front of the room. Table 3, of course. The table reserved for department heads and their spouses. Which meant an evening of listening to people talk about their renovations and their children's exam results and their upcoming holidays to places I would never go because I hadn't taken a real vacation in 4 years. I set my champagne down and looked at the name card beside mine. Brett Jacobs. I stared at it for a moment longer than I should have. Brett Jacobs, Regional Director of Client Relations, 41 years old. The kind of man who walked into a room and immediately made it feel smaller, not because he was imposing, though he was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of unhurried confidence that made you think he'd never once in his life been in a hurry, but because he had this quality of filling space, of making the air around him feel occupied in a way it hadn't been before. We had worked at the same company for 3 years. In that time, we had spoken exactly 37 times in professional settings, and I knew this because I was the kind of person who noticed things like that and immediately wished I didn't. We had collaborated on the Bremer account last spring, sat across from each other in a conference room for 11 days. And somewhere in the middle of day 4, I had realized with the calm clarity of a man watching a natural disaster from a very great distance that I was in serious trouble. I was attracted to Brett Jacobs the way weather fronts are attracted to coastlines, with the kind of slow, inevitable force that doesn't announce itself until suddenly the storm is already there. I had spent the better part of 18 months since the Bremer account making sure that I handled this piece of information with absolute professionalism, which meant not staring, not finding excuses to be in the same room, not thinking about the way he laughed, a real laugh, not a professional one, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made his whole face change, any more than was strictly unavoidable. I was, by most measures, succeeding. You look like a man trying to solve a problem he hasn't fully admitted exists. I turned. Brett Jacobs was standing 2 feet away from me, hands in his pockets, one corner of his mouth lifted in that particular expression of his that I had spent a lot of mental energy trying not to categorize. He was wearing a dark navy suit that fit him well, a pale blue shirt open one button at the collar, no tie. He always looked like he'd arrived from somewhere more interesting than wherever he was. Jacobs, I said with the calm composure of a man who had absolutely not been thinking about him. Green. He tilted his head slightly. You're standing at our table alone, holding a glass of champagne you haven't touched, staring at the seating card like it owes you money. I was reviewing the arrangement. Of course you were. He pulled out the chair beside mine and sat down, which was unexpected, because cocktail hour was still ongoing and most people were still circulating. He glanced around the room with that easy, unhurried calm of his, and then looked back at me with dark eyes that had always, without fail, made it slightly harder to remember what I was about to say next. "How are you, Jim?" Something about the way he asked it, not the polished "how are yous" of colleagues in hallways, but something quieter and more actual, made me pause. "Fine," I said. He looked at me for a beat. "You sure about that? Why wouldn't I be? You lost weight." You lost weight. The observation landed differently than I expected it to. I had lost weight. About 9 pounds in 6 weeks, though I hadn't been trying to, and mostly because I kept forgetting to eat until it was too late in the evening to eat properly and then not doing it anyway. I had noticed. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. "I've been busy," I said. He didn't push it. That was one of the things about Brett that I had noticed over 37 professional interactions. He didn't push. He said the thing, and then he left it there, like an open door, and let you decide whether you walked through it. I didn't walk through it. I sat down beside him, picked up my champagne, and turned the conversation to the quarter's numbers, which was safer ground, and he let me redirect with the grace of a man who understood exactly what I was doing. The evening moved forward. Dinner was served in courses, something with scallops, then a choice of protein, then a dessert I didn't touch. I ate about half of what was on my plate, which I told myself was enough. Around me, conversation flowed with the particular buoyancy of people who were pleased with themselves and the year's results, and I contributed where I was supposed to contribute, laughed when laughter was called for, and maintained the steady, capable presence that was the whole of my professional reputation. Beside me, Brett talked easily with the other table members, but every so often I was aware of him glancing at me in that quiet, sideways way of his, not staring, just checking, like a man keeping an eye on a gauge he wasn't sure about. By the time the award ceremony portion of the evening began, I had drunk approximately a third of a glass of wine and eaten a portion of dinner that my body, in retrospect, was not equipped to process gracefully, given that I'd had only coffee and half a granola bar since the previous evening. I had not slept well in 6 weeks. I had not eaten well in 4. I had been running on caffeine and performance and the specific adrenaline of a person who is very good at not letting things show. The CEO, Marcus Voss, took the stage at the front of the room and began the predictable preamble. The year in review, the numbers, the gratitude, the future outlook. I sat very straight in my chair and listened with the expression of engaged attention that I could produce automatically at this point without any conscious effort. My name was called third. I stood. There was applause. I walked to the stage, 14 steps, I counted them, and shook Marcus's hand and took the award, which was a heavy crystal paperweight that meant nothing and cost probably $300. I said the prepared remarks I had written 3 days ago, hitting the notes of gratitude and team acknowledgement and forward momentum, and the room responded as it was supposed to. And then I stepped back from the podium, and the room did something strange. It tilted, not dramatically, not like a movie. It was a subtle thing, a slight wrongness in the angle of the chandeliers, a feeling of the floor becoming less certain beneath my feet, a roaring at the edges of my hearing that was not quite sound. I had taken 2 steps back toward the stairs at the side of the stage when the floor tilted again, harder this time, and I put my hand out for the edge of the podium and missed it by about 3 inches. The last thing I was aware of was a sharp collective intake of breath from the room, 200 people gasping at the same moment, and then the sensation of the world going sideways, and then nothing at all. I came back to consciousness in pieces. Sound first, a murmur of voices, something with urgency underneath it, someone saying my name. Then sensation, something firm and cool beneath me, and something warm and solid at my back. Then light, too much of it, the overhead kind that presses against your closed eyelids. I opened my eyes. The ceiling of the Harrington Grand's ballroom looked back at me, ornate and very far away. "There he is." The voice was close, directly above me, and it was Brett's. Not Jacob's, in my head anymore, just Brett, because apparently fainting in front of 200 people had knocked down some internal wall. Take it slow. Don't try to sit up yet. I became aware that I was on the floor. Someone had lowered me, or I had been caught, because I was lying on the carpet rather than splayed across it, and there was a folded jacket beneath my head. My own jacket, I realized, which meant someone had taken it off me, and the warm, solid thing at my back was Brett's hand flat between my shoulder blades, which he had apparently been using to keep me from rolling onto my side. "I'm fine," I said, which was not true but was apparently my default setting. "You fainted, Jim. I lost my footing." "On what?" There was something in his voice that was both gently amused and deeply serious. "The floor of the stage? You fainted. You can call it something else if it makes you feel better, but from where I was sitting, you went down like a building." I turned my head and found his face very close to mine, which was a lot, given the current state of my internal situation. He was kneeling beside me, jacket gone, sleeves rolled up, forearms resting on his knees with the calm competence of a man who knew exactly what to do in an emergency and was doing it without any drama whatsoever. "How long was I out?" I asked. "Maybe 40 seconds. I was at your side before you finished falling." There was something in that sentence that I filed away carefully. Around us, I was becoming aware of the broader room. People on their feet, a corona of concerned faces at a respectful distance, murmuring, and the sound of heels on marble as someone moved quickly. Someone was on the phone. Someone else was asking for water. And then the crowd parted slightly, and a woman in a dark red dress with an authoritative walk came through it, and I recognized her as Dr. Alana Park, the company's medical consultant who had apparently been a guest at the dinner. She was carrying a small bag, and her expression was the particular mixture of professional calm and private concern that doctors did when they were assessing rather than diagnosing. She crouched beside me and looked at my face and then looked at Brett. "Has he been responsive since he came around?" "Just now, fully," Brett said. "Before that, partial responses, his colors coming back." She took my wrist and found my pulse with practiced ease and was quiet for a moment. "Jim," she said, "can you tell me what you ate today?" I opened my mouth. She looked at my face. "Don't edit. What did you actually eat?" A pause. "Coffee this morning. Half a granola bar around 11. Part of the dinner tonight." The quiet that followed was brief, but weighted. "How long has this been the pattern?" I looked at the ceiling. "A few weeks." "Sleep?" "Inconsistent." "What does that mean in hours?" 4 to 5. Brett made a sound that was not quite a word but communicated something very specific. "Dr. Kurd." Park sat back on her heels and looked at me with the kind of steady, unflinching attention that I had always found in doctors who were genuinely good at their jobs. Then she looked out at the room, at the 200 people who were still there, still watching, the string quartet fallen silent, the entire social machinery of the evening grinding to a halt. And in a clear voice that carried without effort across the hushed space, she said, "Mr. Green has acute exhaustion, dehydration, and nutritional deficiency. He has fainted due to prolonged physiological neglect. There is no hidden illness, no cardiac event, no cause for alarm beyond what I have described." She paused. "What I can tell you," she continued, and something in her tone shifted, became more deliberate. "The way a person speaks when they mean to be heard, is that this man has been running on empty for weeks, and tonight his body simply stopped waiting for permission to rest." She did not say it unkindly. She said it the way facts are stated when the facts matter. The room was so quiet I could hear the candles. Then, after a beat of that extraordinary silence, she looked back down at me. "You are going to be fine," she said quietly. "For me only now. But you are done for tonight. Can you sit up slowly?" Brett's hand was already moving, one arm coming around my shoulders from behind, supporting without asking permission in a way that felt so natural I almost didn't notice it. I sat up slowly. The room held steady. The roaring at the edges of my hearing had retreated to something manageable. "Good," said Dr. Park. She looked at Brett. "He needs water, something light to eat, rest, and someone to take him home. Can you manage that?" "Yes." Brett said, without any hesitation at all. I turned my head and found him very close again, jaw set, eyes dark and very serious. He was looking at me with an expression I did not have a category for, and I was too tired and too wrung out to build one from scratch. "You don't have to," I started. "Jim." His voice was very quiet. "Stop." I stopped. The hotel staff brought a wheelchair, which I refused. They brought water, which I drank. They brought crackers and sliced fruit on a small plate, and Brett handed them to me one piece at a time without comment while Dr. Time Park made notes, and the room very gradually returned to a version of normal around us. People settling back into their seats with the subdued energy of a crowd that had witnessed something and did not quite know what to do with it. Marcus Voss came over and said concerned things, and I said appropriate things back, and he looked genuinely rattled in a way that made me feel briefly bad, because Marcus was, beneath the CEO polish, a decent man. By 8:45 I was on my feet, jacket retrieved, standing near the coat check with Brett's hand under my elbow in a way that I was aware of with probably more attention than the situation warranted. "You don't have to take me home," I said again. "I know," he said. "I can call a car." "You could." A pause. "But you're not going to?" I asked. He looked at me sideways. "Are you always this difficult when someone's trying to take care of you, or is tonight special?" I considered the question seriously. "I think it's a character trait." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile but close to one. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I thought so." His car was pulled around by the valet while I stood in the hotel entrance and breathed the cold air and felt the world gradually becoming more solid and reliable again beneath my feet. He came to stand beside me while we waited, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him in the cold. "I'm sorry," I said. "For what?" "For making a scene." He looked at me for a long moment. "Jim, you passed out? That's not making a scene. That's your body having an emergency. In front of the entire company." "In front of the entire company," he confirmed. "And every single person in that room is going to go home tonight thinking about whether they've been taking care of themselves. You accidentally did a public service." I laughed before I could stop myself. It came out a little ragged, not quite the way laughter usually sounded from me, and something about the rawness of it made Brett go very still for a fraction of a second before he let out a breath. The car arrived. We drove through the city, which was lit up in the way it only was on clear, cold nights. All reflections and moving lights, the kind of view that usually felt like backdrop, but tonight felt somehow present and real. I sat in the passenger seat with the heat on low and a water bottle in my hands and did not say anything for several blocks. Neither did Brett. There was something comfortable about the silence. Not the silence of two people who have nothing to say, but the silence of two people who are in the middle of saying something that hasn't found its words yet. You noticed something was wrong before it happened. He was watching the road. "I noticed you weren't eating, and that you kept doing that thing with your jaw." "What thing with my jaw?" "The thing you do when you're trying to look like you're fine." You said it very slightly, like you're holding something in place by force. I stared at him. He glanced over. "What?" "You've been paying enough attention to notice that?" He looked back at the road, a pause that stretched 3 or 4 seconds longer than it needed to. "Yeah," he said finally, "I have." I turned the water bottle in my hands and said nothing because there were things inside that sentence that I was not in a position to unpack in the car in the dark. 6 weeks into the worst stretch of insomnia and self-neglect of my adult life. "Why?" I asked, another pause. "You really want to have this conversation right now?" "Probably not," I admitted. "But I'm asking anyway." He drove for half a block without speaking. The lights of the city moved across his face, amber white, the deep red of a traffic signal catching the side of his jaw as he slowed to a stop. He looked at me then, full on, for the first time since we'd gotten in the car, and his eyes were very dark and very steady. "Because I've been paying attention to you for a long time, Jim. Longer than is strictly professional, and lately I keep watching you disappear a little bit at a time and not knowing what to do with that." The traffic light changed. He looked back at the road. I held the water bottle and breathed, slowly, the way my therapist taught me, and felt something that had been very tightly held inside my chest for approximately 18 months begin, very slightly, to loosen. "I have a problem," I said. "With the not eating?" "With that, and with a few other things." A pause. A pause. "One of them being that I've been paying attention to you for a long time too, and I've been very carefully not doing anything about it." Silence. Then, "Why?" "Because you're a colleague. And because I didn't know if—" I stopped, started again. "Because it's easier not to risk the things that matter." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was very careful. "And, does it matter?" The city moved past my window, 12 blocks, 14, the kind of time it takes to decide something important. "Yes," I said. My apartment was on the 14th floor of a building that was quieter at this hour than it ever was during the day. Brett came up without being asked, and I didn't tell him not to, which said more than most of the things I'd said all evening. He stood in my kitchen and opened cupboards with the comfortable authority of a man who has decided he is staying and is making himself useful, while I sat at the kitchen island on a stool and watched him and thought about what had happened tonight with a strange lightness, as if the fainting had unlocked something, knocked loose a panel in a wall I'd been maintaining for too long. "You have eggs," he said. "I do occasionally shop. And bread, butter." He turned and looked at me. "I'm making you eggs. Don't argue." "I wasn't going to." He raised an eyebrow. "You were going to say you weren't hungry." "I wasn't going to." "You were absolutely going to." I pressed my lips together. He turned back to the stove with something that was unmistakably a smile. The kitchen filled with the soft sounds of someone cooking. The click of the burner, the sound of butter melting, the particular quiet industry of a person who knew what they were doing and wasn't performing it. Brett cooked the way he did most things. I was learning without fuss, without narration, with a focused calm that made it look easy. I watched his hands. Wide palms, capable, a small scar along the outside edge of the left one that I had never noticed before. He was rolling the eggs in the pan with gentle, precise movements, and I realized I was watching him the way I'd been careful not to watch him for nearly 2 years, with no filter, no professional distance. Just the actual thing. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You can ask me anything." The Bremer account. Day 4. He glanced over his shoulder. Something in his expression shifted, a slight wariness, and underneath it, something else. "What about it?" "You said something. About the Meridian Partnership. You said—" I stopped, reforming the memory. "You said sometimes the best partnerships aren't the ones that make the most sense on paper. They're the ones where you stop trying to optimize and just start trusting." A pause. He turned back to the eggs. "You remember that?" "I remember most things you've said to me, which is something I'd been trying not to examine too closely for 18 months. He plated the eggs, simple buttered toast alongside, a glass of water, and set it in front of me, and then leaned on the counter on the other side of the island and looked at me with that same open steadiness he'd had since the hotel. "Day 4, he said. "Yes. That was when I started having trouble looking at you directly." I stared. "I'd look at you making notes, and then I'd have to look somewhere else," he continued, with the tone of a man making a confession he'd been holding a long time and had finally decided the holding wasn't worth it. I told myself it was the pressure of the project. Then I told myself it was because you were interesting to work with. Then, around day 8, I stopped telling myself things and just accepted that I had a problem. "A problem?" I repeated. "Of the same category as yours, apparently." A slight, wry lift at the corner of his mouth. "We've been very professionally managing our problems at each other for a year and a half." I picked up the fork. "We have. And now you've fainted on a stage, and a doctor has announced to the entire company that you've been destroying yourself quietly for weeks, and we're in your kitchen at 11 p.m. "Yes. And I don't want to go home," he said simply. "I want to stay until I know you've eaten properly and slept, and then I want to come back tomorrow. And I have been trying to figure out for several months how to tell you that without it being the most professionally inappropriate thing I've ever said." I ate a bite of egg and thought about this. It's not inappropriate, I said. No? We work in different departments. There's no direct reporting relationship. I met his eyes. And even if there were, I think I've reached a point tonight where I'm fairly done pretending the professional considerations outweigh the actual ones. He studied me for a moment. The actual ones. The ones where I've been half in love with you since April of last year, and I keep going to work every day and not doing anything about it because I'm afraid of the 1,000 ways it could go wrong. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the city hummed and glittered 14 floors below us, indifferent and beautiful. Brett reached across the island and put his hand over mine. Not grabbing, not dramatic, just warm and present and steady. Eat your eggs, he said. And something about the simplicity of it, the gentleness, the way he said it like we had all the time in the world, made my eyes sting unexpectedly, which was alarming and also felt very right. I ate my eggs. He stayed. He stayed while I ate and while we talked in the kitchen. Real talking. The kind that doesn't happen in conference rooms. About things that mattered and things that didn't, and 1,000 pieces of each other's lives that hadn't come up in 37 professional interactions. He stayed while I showered and the exhaustion settled into my bones like something finally, gratefully released. He stayed in the living room with a book he found on my shelf, sitting in the armchair by the window, reading. When I came back out in clean clothes that were too comfortable for anything but collapse. You should sleep, he said, without looking up from the book. I'm aware. I sat on the couch across from him and looked at him reading in my living room, the lamp casting warm light across the angle of his cheekbone, his feet crossed at the ankle. Completely at ease in a way that looked like he belonged there, and felt something so large and so quiet that I didn't have a name for it. You could go home, I said. He turned a page. I could. You don't have to stay. He looked up then. His expression was the kind that closes distances. Jim, very quietly, go to sleep. I'll be here. I went to sleep. I slept for 9 hours, which was more sleep than I'd had in a single stretch in 6 weeks. And when I woke up, it was morning, and the apartment was full of pale gray light, and the smell of coffee, and Brett was in the kitchen. I lay in bed for a moment and listened to the sounds of him moving around. Cabinet opening, the particular percussion of mugs, water running, and felt something that I identified, slowly and with some wonder, as peace. Not the held-together peace of a person managing themselves carefully. The other kind. The kind that comes when you're not doing it alone. He had made coffee and found bread, and had apparently made a trip to the small corner store that I knew was open at 6 a.m. because I was sometimes awake at 6 a.m. for the wrong reasons. And there were eggs again, and something with cheese warm on a plate on the kitchen island. He was sitting at the island himself when I came out, reading something on his phone, a mug in his hand, still in yesterday's dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked up. Morning, he said. Morning. I sat down and pulled the plate toward me, and the normalness of it was almost unbearable in the best possible way. You went to the store. The options in your kitchen were limited. I told you I occasionally shop. You occasionally have the ingredients for eggs. That's not the same thing. He slid a mug across to me. Drink. Don't talk until you've had at least half of it. You're always more reasonable when you've had coffee. I looked at him. You know that about me. I've seen you in early morning project meetings. A slight smile. You should never be in early morning project meetings. My schedule doesn't really, Jim. I drank the coffee. He watched me eat and didn't say anything, which would have been uncomfortable from most people, but from him was a different thing. The quality of his attention was warm rather than invasive. Like being in a room where someone has opened the windows for you without making a production of it. Halfway through the plate, I looked up and found him watching me with an expression that he didn't try to arrange into anything more careful. What? I said. I'm glad you're okay, he said. And I'm glad last night happened, though not the part where you fell off a stage. I didn't fall off the stage, I fainted gracefully. You were caught by your own momentum and the grace of someone's arm. Whose arm? He raised an eyebrow and pointed to himself. You caught me? I was at your side before you hit the ground, did you not? He stopped. You really were out before you landed, weren't you? I don't remember anything between the floor tilting and your face above me. He was quiet for a moment, and something moved across his expression that looked like it might have been the aftermath of fear, the kind that shows up after the crisis, when the adrenaline leaves and what you were almost facing becomes briefly visible. I moved fast, he said. Apparently, I'd do it again. I looked at him across the island, in the morning light, with coffee in my hands, and yesterday's drama sitting between us like something that had already become part of the story we were building, and said what was true. I know you would, I said. That's the thing, Brett. You're the kind of person who would, and I've known it for a long time, and I kept that knowledge very carefully in the part of myself I wasn't supposed to act on. He set his mug down. And now? Now I fainted on a stage, and Dr. Park told 200 people that I've been running on empty, and apparently it takes public humiliation to loosen me up. His mouth curved. Or, he said, it just takes someone catching you. The morning stretched around us, soft and gray and full of possibility. I'd like you to stay, I said. Not just this morning, I stopped and tried again. I'd like to do this, whatever this is, properly. Intentionally. You mean dating. I mean trying. I looked at him steadily. I am, for transparency's sake, not good at the particular kind of vulnerability this requires. I've been managing myself alone for a long time, and I've gotten very efficient at it, which is also probably why I ended up on a ballroom floor. I know, he said. I'm telling you in advance, so it's not a surprise. Jim. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the island. I know. I've been watching you manage yourself alone from a professional distance for a year and a half. I'm not surprised. I'm also not intimidated. A pause. I'm patient when something is worth it. The words settled somewhere in the middle of my chest and stayed there. Okay, I said. Okay? Yes, okay. I picked up my coffee. Stay for breakfast, at least. He leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who has already decided he is going nowhere. Already am. Things change in small ways first. He texted in the evenings. Nothing demanding, just the kind of messages that tell you someone is thinking about you without making a production of it. A funny observation from his day. A question about a book he'd taken from my shelf. Once, at 9 p.m. on a Thursday when I was still at the office, just, "You've eaten today, right?" I had, actually. I'd started setting a reminder on my phone. Something embarrassingly simple that I had apparently needed external prompting to implement. I told him this. He sent back a reply that was not quite a lecture and not quite a joke, and was something more useful than either, which was, "I'll be your reminder until you don't need one. That's allowed." We met for lunch twice. Dinner once at a restaurant that was neither too casual nor too formal. And I was nervous in a way I had not been nervous about anything in years, which was somehow clarifying. Being nervous meant something mattered. And the reminder that things could still matter after several years of managed flatness was startling and welcome. He was easy to be with. That was the thing I hadn't expected, though I suppose I should have, given that I'd been aware of him for 2 years and hadn't once observed him being difficult. He was direct without being unkind, opinionated without being rigid, interested in everything with a genuine curiosity that made conversations feel like explorations rather than performances. He also had, I discovered, a very low tolerance for watching me pretend things were fine when they weren't. "You're doing it again," he said on our third dinner, which was takeout at my apartment because I had had a bad week and being in public felt like too much effort, and I had admitted this to him without too much internal negotiation, which was itself a small victory. Doing what? The jaw thing. I touched my jaw. "I'm fine. You said that in the hotel too." He reached across the table and put his fingers under my chin, very lightly, just enough to tilt my face toward him. "You're allowed to not be fine. I know that." "Do you?" I looked at him. He looked back. The lamplight was warm, and the apartment was quiet, and something about the steadiness of his gaze made the armor I'd been carrying so long feel, in that moment, genuinely heavy. "It doesn't come naturally," I admitted. "I know." He dropped his hand but didn't look away. "Tell me what's wrong," I told him. It wasn't dramatic, the telling. No catharsis, no great release. Just words carefully arranged and then less carefully arranged as the evening went on. About the pressure I put on myself and the way I'd learned a long time ago that the safest approach to the world was to be excellent and self-sufficient and not need anything from anybody. About the 6 weeks before the dinner and what had driven them. About the particular loneliness of being competent. He listened the way people rarely listen, fully, without assembling his response while I was still talking. When I'd said what there was to say, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The thing about being self-sufficient is that it's a survival strategy. It's useful when you need it. But you've been applying it to everything, including the parts of your life where you don't need to survive, where you could actually just live." I sat with that. "Yeah," I said. "You're allowed to need things, Jim. I know, including me." There was a weight in the simplicity of that, not a demand, just an offer, the cleanest kind. "I'm working on it," I said. "I know." He picked up his fork. "That's enough." We were professional about it at work. This was a decision we made explicitly one Sunday morning over coffee at his kitchen table, his apartment this time, which had more plants than I had expected, and better natural light and smelled like something warm and woody that I now associated directly with him. We would not make it a thing at work. We would conduct ourselves the same way we always had, which in practice meant our 37 professional interactions became 38, and then 50, and then a number. I stopped counting because counting wasn't necessary anymore. What changed was small and internal. The way I felt when I walked into a meeting and he was already there. The thing that happened to my posture when he was in the room, some small release, as if his presence adjusted some internal calibration. The way he'd find me across a conference table and his eyes would say something brief and private before returning to the business at hand. We were good at it, or at least we thought we were. It was our colleague Sarah and client relations who said to me one afternoon in the break room, with the blunt affection of a person who has worked with you for 4 years, "You look different." Different how? She studied me. Less like a very sophisticated alarm system, more like a person. A pause. "Also, you're eating lunch every day now. We all noticed." "I eat lunch. Jim. You used to have coffee at your desk and call it a meal." She tilted her head. "Does this have anything to do with the fact that Brett Jacobs has started making sure there's food at every meeting he runs?" I controlled my expression carefully. "I don't know what you're referring to." She smiled in the way of a woman who knows exactly what she is referring to. "Of course not." She picked up her coffee. "He's good, by the way. For whatever it's worth, from someone who's been watching you both orbit each other for a while." She left the break room before I could respond to that. It was a Saturday, which had become a day that meant something different than it used to. Saturdays used to be the day I caught up on work I hadn't finished during the week, replied to the emails I'd deferred, did all the administration of life that I'd been too busy to manage on weekdays. Saturdays were maintenance. They had no texture of their own. Now, Saturdays were Brett's kitchen, or mine. They were walks in the park near his building when the weather permitted, or the market on the corner when it didn't. They were the particular intimacy of two people learning each other's small habits. The way he always read the last page of a book first, which I found philosophically alarming and apparently charming. The way I organized everything by a private system that made sense only to me, but that he adapted to without complaint. They were evenings on the couch with the lights low and the kind of quiet that isn't silence, but is a shared breathing. We had been doing this for 8 weeks. He had stayed over several times. I had stayed at his once. An accident of timing that became intentional halfway through the evening when neither of us mentioned leaving. I was learning, in ways that felt foundational, that staying was something I could do. That being present in another person's life without managing myself out of it was possible. It was one of those Saturday evenings. Late, the kind of late that feels separate from the day before it, when the city has settled and the particular quality of nightlight changes something in the atmosphere. We were on my couch, him reading. Me with the document I had stopped pretending to read about 20 minutes ago. And I became aware at some point that I had stopped even looking at the document and was just present in the room with him. watching the way the lamp made the shadows in the angle of his cheekbone and the unhurried way his hand moved to turn a page. He looked up. "What?" he said. "Nothing," I said. Then, before the automatic professional manager in me could intervene, "I love you." The silence that followed was 4 seconds long and felt longer. His expression did something I had never seen it do before, something open and unguarded and very still, as if the words had hit him in a place he'd been waiting for something to reach. "Yeah?" he said quietly. "I've been thinking it for a while. I thought I should say it." A pause. "I'm not good at saying it. You just said it. Once. I make no guarantees about regularity." Something shifted in his face. The fullness of it. The completeness. And he set his book down and reached across the cushion between us and found my hand and held it with the same simple, uncomplicated warmth that had been, I realized, the thing pulling me in since the beginning. Not the fireworks kind of love that needs to announce itself. The other kind. The kind that shows up in kitchens at 11 p.m. and makes sure you eat and says, "I'll be here," and means it. "I love you too," he said. "Have for a while." Since day 4? Earlier, if I'm being honest. I just didn't have the language for it until the Bremer account. I turned that over. "You were paying attention before day 4. "I told you," he said. "I've been paying attention to you for a long time." The quarterly review is a different kind of event than the annual dinner. No crystal awards, no string quartets, no scallops. Just a catered meeting in the large conference room on the 10th floor. 60 people. The kind of event that usually feels like a procedural obligation, and today feels for reasons I can clearly identify. Like something I am slightly more present for than usual. Brett is across the room when I arrive. He's talking to someone from the strategy team, hands in his pockets, wearing that dark jacket he favors for internal meetings. He glances up when I walk in, finds me without looking for me, which is the thing about being known by someone. The way your peripheral vision learns to locate them, and the corner of his mouth does a very small private thing. I take my seat and open my materials. Dr. Stockter. Park is there for a wellness program presentation, which is apparently a new initiative Marcus has been developing since the quarter where one of his senior employees fainted on a stage. She sees me across the room and gives me the brisk nod of a doctor who has seen you at your worst and is pleased by the improvement. At the end of the meeting, as people are packing up, she stops by my chair. "You look better," she says. "I feel better." Sleeping, 7 hours most nights, sometimes 8. Eating. Regularly. My colleague. I stop. Someone reminds me. She looks at me with the sharp, friendly perception of a doctor who notices things. "Is that the someone who ran across a ballroom to catch you before you hit the floor?" I don't say anything, she smiles. "I'm glad," she says simply. "That's all. I'm glad." 6 months after the night everything changed, we went back to the Harrington Grand. Brett's idea. He proposed it in the way he proposed most things. Directly, without ceremony, with the small waiting quality in his eyes that said he was genuinely asking rather than announcing. "You want to go back to the hotel where I fainted," I said. "I want to have dinner somewhere that matters to us," he said. "That night matters to us. I want to eat good food at a table we chose and have a conversation that has nothing to do with work and make different memories of the same place." I thought about it for about 3 seconds. "Okay. Yeah, reservation for 2. Not a work event, just dinner." He booked it for a Friday. The ballroom looked different when you chose it. The chandeliers I had been staring at from the floor were beautiful from eye level. The tables were the same white linen and ivory flowers, but the sound of the room was different. Full of private conversations, individual evenings, none of the particular pressure of performance. We sat across from each other, not side by side as we had been at the company dinner, but facing, which was its own kind of different, and ordered wine and food we actually wanted, and talked about everything and nothing. And at some point during the main course, I became aware that I was simply happy. Not the managed approximation of contentment. Not the absence of distress that I'd sometimes confused for well-being. The actual thing, present and uncomplicated, sitting in my chest like something that had finally decided to settle. "You're doing it again," Brett said. "Doing what?" "The thing where you go quiet and then look slightly surprised to find yourself there." "I'm happy," I said. "I keep noticing it." His expression was quiet and full. "Good. It's not something I had a lot of practice at." "I know." He reached across the table. The same gesture he'd made in my kitchen on that first morning, hand covering mine, warm and present. "We can practice." Outside the tall windows of the Harrington Grand, the city was lit in all its ordinary, extraordinary nighttime brightness. 12 stories of glass and steel between us and the rest of the world. A table for two in a room that had once watched me fall, and a man across from me who had run across a ballroom to make sure I didn't hit the ground alone. I turned my hand over beneath his and held on. "Here is what I have learned to understand in the months since that night, Dr. Tier." Park's announcement, the one that silenced the entire room, that made 200 people hold their breath in the sudden hush of a ballroom, was not really about me. Or not only about me. It was about the specific and particular courage of stating something true in a room full of people who have been trained to perform wellness. It was about a doctor looking at a man who had been quietly erasing himself and saying out loud in public where no one could look away, "This is what neglect of yourself looks like, and it is not fine. And it is not sustainable," and someone caught him before he hit the ground, but next time, someone might not. People talked about it. I know this because colleagues mentioned it to me, carefully and kindly, in the weeks after. Some of them had made appointments with their own doctors. Some of them had started going home at 5 instead of 7. One woman in finance told me she'd started eating actual lunches again for the first time in 2 years. "You accidentally started a wellness revolution," Brett told me one evening, with the wry warmth that I'd come to love in the specific way you love someone's particular qualities once you've had time to know them fully. "I would have preferred to start it without the public fainting," I said. "Sure," he said, "but now it has a story. People remember stories." He tilted his head slightly. "And the story has a good ending." I thought about that. "Does it have an ending?" He looked at me. "No," he said after a moment, "just a beginning. The thing about Tuesdays is that they are indistinguishable from other days if you're not paying attention, and everything if you are. I am, these days, paying more attention. Attention to the morning light on the kitchen counter and the particular sound of coffee being made by someone who knows how I take it. Attention to the way the day has texture again. Not the smooth, managed surface of performance, but the actual grain of things, the small moments that accumulate into a life. I eat breakfast. I sleep 7 to 8 hours. I text back when I say, I will. I say out loud to the man who sits across from me at a table or beside me on a couch or in the space next to me in the morning when the world is very quiet. The true things when I have them, which is not always easy and which I am still learning, but which I am learning. I am not the man who walked up those hotel steps 9 months ago, counting his way through an evening with the specific discipline of a person who has forgotten what it means to simply be somewhere and want to be there. Or maybe I am, still, in some ways. The habits of a long time do not vanish in a single night, even a night like that one. But I am also, increasingly, someone else. The version of myself that exists when I am not managing the distance between me and everything that matters. There is a man in my life who caught me when I fell. Not metaphorically, literally physically across a hotel ballroom, who was at my side before I finished falling, who stayed in my kitchen and made eggs at 11 p.m. and looked at me across an island and said, I'll be here, and has been without exception exactly that. Being loved well, I have discovered, is a skill that requires as much learning as any other. The learning curve is steep when you have been self-sufficient for a very long time. The learning is worth it. The room may have been silenced by an announcement, but the important sounds came after. The small daily ones, the unremarkable and essential ones, the ones that mean a life is actually being lived instead of managed from a careful distance. The coffee being made. The morning light. His voice, unhurried and warm, from the other room. From the other room. Jim, come eat breakfast. I go. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.